Are you tired of not seeing your name at the top of the damage meters? Are you just struggling to figure out how to do more damage or how to perform better? Well, in this video I want to talk a little bit about how to improve as a DPS player and also what it means to play DPS. So in order to actually become the best DPS player that you can be, there are actually a few fundamentals that will it's really helpful to understand. The first one is a little bit on the nose, but it's simply just to know your rotation or learn your rotation. And that might seem like a given, that of course you're just supposed to know your rotation and stuff like that. And it's true. Where I see a lot of people falter a little bit here is that everyone can sit and practice their rotation on dummies and target dummies and whatever, and just when nothing is threatening at all, and just get your rotation down. Everyone can do that. But as soon as you actually go into combat, or you actually go into Mythic Plus or Raid or whatever, and as soon as you get hit by frontals or spires, anything you need to deal with outside of rotation, for a lot of especially if you're new, playing a class for the first time, or you're relatively new, you'll get completely thrown off. So the very first tip here is simply just to get your rotation down. One trick that I've been using, using target dummies can be effective in the way that you can see how spells work, or you can see how the different buffs, how long they have, you can get a sense of the timing going on here. But actually getting used to using your abilities at the right time and not faltering your rotation just because you have to move out of something. LFR is actually a really good place to practice this. It's a environment that's really safe. It's very, I don't want to say easy, but it's it's hard to fail at LFR. Most people don't care that you're doing less damage or not doing more optimal. There's always going to be people there to carry a little bit. So I wouldn't worry that much. LFR is a really good way to have a boss fight. That's very minimal on mechanics, but if you actually play and pay attention to the mechanics, you can actually use that to get a better grasp of your rotation. And that's just basically the fundamental of also just take your time. The whole rotation and the getting the abilities down and getting exactly to know your class, that's something that's gonna take time. And you also need, if you want to be a good DPS player, you're gonna need patience, right? To actually spend the time learning your class, learning all the different things it can do and what situation benefits it the most. And all those kind of things just comes from experience and playing the game. So don't go in and expecting that you're going to be the top of the damage meters unless you're playing something completely broken augmentation. But besides that point, don't go into it expecting that you're going to be the top. It's going to take time to learn a class and learn to play it properly at max level. So yeah, have fun with it. Go into different dungeons, have the experience, play it, and get better at your simple fundamental rotation and what you're supposed to click at the different times. But in order to actually do the max amount of damage, your rotation isn't enough. Another huge aspect of it is also knowing, and it's probably my biggest advice, I feel like I say it in all my videos, but knowing when to use your cooldowns. A friend of mine who came back to WoW and played DPS, he followed a streamer who played the same class as him, and he was asking me, he just did not understand why is he not doing the same overall damage. In his burst and in his rotation and stuff like that, he is hitting the same numbers, but simply just why is the overall damage so much lower? And I only had one question for him. How often are you pressing your cooldowns? In this specific scenario, we were playing in season 1, so that was when we were playing Ruby Lightpool, and Ruby had a timer of 30 minutes, and I basically just asked him, well, in theory, your 2-minute cooldowns, you can press them 15 times throughout this dungeon. And I know it's a little bit less because there's some you spend on movement and some packs you want to save it for the other, but in general, you can use it 15 times. And when I asked him, he actually only used his like huge cooldowns maybe 6 or 7 times. And when you think about like, you know, he is losing like 8 times using his big cooldowns. If you think about like how much damage that is gonna be overall to lose, it's really like, you know, substantial. So my advice with him was really simply just to use your cooldowns more. But again, it's also just a tiny bit more nuanced than just having to press it. As a golden rule, if you're getting into this, I would actually advise you just to throw them almost like on cooldown, because it's a really great way to learn when you want the cooldowns when you go into a pool and you don't have them. That's a really good like learning experience. So if you're like, you know, getting to lower class, or it's the start of a new season, or you're getting to know the dungeon pool, or like when to use the cooldowns, if you're not 100% sure when you want the cooldowns, use them whenever they come up, because you are going to notice when you want them and you don't have them. And this whole thing about like, you know, saving your cooldowns. So what do you want to save the cooldowns for? Like, what's the mentality behind that? When you're doing more of these dungeons, you kind of realize that there are certain packs or specific bosses that are more dangerous or more threatening to your party than others. Because the thing about like thinking about your cooldown or like your big damage buttons and stuff like that is, you're not using them because you're gonna top the meters. You're using them because you want to kill things as fast as possible before they can become a big threat to your party. This is where it would be like super helpful to have like played other roles such as a tank or a healer, because then you really got to know like the survivability of your party and your group, where it is these like really danger points are. And you also want to be aware that like these danger pools, like they can change from week to week. You can have, the clearest example is, you know, Fortified Tyrannical. There are like, you know, fights where, well, you want to spend cooldown right before the frog boss in Halls of Confusion on Fortified. Because like those little mini bosses here actually are gonna be potentially more dangerous than the frog boss itself. And then again on Tyrannical, of course you don't want to spend your cooldowns there, then you want to hold it for the boss. So there's also things with like the different affixes, bolstering and like enrage and like, you know, when and how you want to use your cooldowns. It's not completely black and white. It is a lot more nuanced, and it changes like also going from dungeon to dungeon. You have tanks that will pull differently and like pull different kind of packs. So it's not about like, you know, being well aware of what's going on in the dungeon and what the different mobs and bosses do and like, you know, the threat to you and your party. That's kind of like the realization when you want to have cooldowns, but don't hold them back at the same time. Imagine like how many pulls you can actually have your cooldowns up for. How many packs can you actually like damage down really quickly and still have your cooldowns back for the boss or something like that. So use them smartly, but don't be afraid to use them. I would definitely say that the first advice, just to use them at like, just throw them out. Every single time you have this like the thought of, should I do it? Yes, you should do it. And then afterwards you can look back and be like, well, you know what? Yeah, I used them there, but I was like behind 30 seconds on the next pull. You know, like I would rather have them there. Well, good. Now you know when to save them. So when you have learned your rotation, like, you know, in a way that's like you can play it almost perfectly without like still doing mechanics without being interrupted or having to start all over or something like that, and also you have a better understanding of when to use your cooldowns and also using them more, there's another thing that like, you know, really will have a huge emphasis on how much damage you will be doing. And the really big one is actually use your defensives. I'm sure every single healer main who might potentially watch this video is right now is like throwing up his hands in complete cheer, but yes, a dead DPS is a bad DPS. This is something I really had to learn a lot of actually when I started pushing and playing a little bit more seriously back in the very end of BFA and going into the first season of Shadowlands. I would be totally fine, you know, in heroic dungeons and like low mythic. You never basically have to worry about your health because nothing's gonna one-shot you, nothing's gonna really bring you down to too much unless the whole party fails at like a wipe mechanic or something like that. So you don't have to think about your health, that's just a healer problem. But like going into higher keys and more difficult content, you kind of just really realize that there are things that's gonna kill you. And there's things that's like just the healer just can't deal with it. Like, you know, you need to pop your own defensives and use them in order to not die and be able to like live through the pull and do the damage. So just to be like really like fundamental, like how do you go around like, you know, using your defensives? You really don't want to use all of your defensives all at the same time. This usually happens, at least from my own like anecdotal like experience. This happened a lot when I was less experienced, and I would put into like the damage towards me would actually like, you know, surprise me. So I just like kind of in a panic, it just used all of my stuff, and then just, you know, I'm left completely naked. Instead, what you want to do is you want to space them out actually a little bit. You don't have to deal or take every single mechanic that's gonna like hit you with a defensive. You can space them out a little bit. And again, this is also, I feel like a little bit like on the nose, but use your damage reduction, because most classes have a form of like damage reduction. Use them before you take the damage. I've seen so many people, you know, get hit by a lot and then use the defensive or like the damage reduction. That's no bueno. Like that's not good. You don't want to do that. Instead, you want to, you know, use it before you damage. And if you don't, if you get hit by something that you didn't know was there, you didn't see it coming, or something else coming, don't use your defensive right after it, because then now you're basically just wasting it. For how WoW like works, mostly you will get hit by something, and there will be some few seconds before the next thing will hit you again. So don't use your defensive in a panic. Don't use your damage reduction right after you've been hit, because you're like, oh, I need to like save myself now. Now you need to actually hold on to that for when you know something is coming. But then like, how do you know when something is coming? That's something that's really difficult in the first start of a season, or when you're starting to learn the different dungeons. There's no easy way around it. Like just the same way as like your rotational skills, it's all about, you know, experience and seeing what's happening. So I mentioned, in my last video, you know, I have like, for example, with my UI here, with my plater, I know because they're highlighted which mobs are dangerous. So I'm like, you know, have all color graded right now, like, you know, just going into it, which mob should I look out for? And it's all about just looking at what they're casting. Something you also can do is just on your damage meters, you can actually select a thing called damage taken, which shows just the same way, you know, with the damage meters, it shows all the party members, and they show like who's taking the most damage and by from what, if you like mouse over it. And you can use this tool to see if you get hit by something really nasty and you're like, okay, what brought me down to like so little HP, or maybe even what killed me. You can actually go in there, you can actually see what abilities and what like hit you and what did the most like damage to you. It's important to like realize that you're not going to be perfect on the first time you're doing a dungeon or something like that, or the first weeks maybe even. Like it's going to take time to build up this like knowledge of like what is out there to get me, like what's going to hurt, and also to get into the rhythm of like what to use the defensive cooldowns on. You should not expect a healer just to like have sole responsibility of your survival, like your survival. It's your responsibility for you to survive and for you to like not die. The healer is there to cover up some of your mistakes, but he or she will not be able to cover up every single one of them, and definitely not like very, very bad ones. And just to be honest, I would also want to say that like you can buy health potions really, really cheap, which is like they are extremely good for like a lot of DPS classes, specifically hunters. If you're playing as a hunter and you don't have healing potions key-minded, then I don't know what to say. You should really like, you know, do that. They are so beneficial, and they are so like they will like save your life so many times. And actually, funny enough, the same way you're getting better at your damage cooldowns is the same way that you also will get better with using your defensive ones. You just have to use them. You have to use them and then actually notice, because you will notice when you don't have them up and when you really wanted them. That's when you realize, okay, I need to save it for this specific pull. Because that's also the thing, right? I know a lot of healers who are using Omni CD to track the defenses of their party members, and the healer is gonna will have to have faith in you that you're gonna play your class right and doing everything right. So if he sees that you have all your defensive cooldowns up, well, he might not focus you on you that much, because he knows that whatever you're gonna take of damage, you can deal with that yourself. But if he's gonna notice that you actually used it, maybe in the wrong spot or whatever, but you don't have it up, then you actually might have the healer to pay a little bit more attention to you. So I wouldn't be nervous about not having you defensive up for the exactly right times. If you have a good enough healer, you will be fine. But it's just so much important that you actually just get in the rhythm of it and to get under your skin to just use your defensive, basically just whenever they are up, right? Now the last thing I really want to point out here is also just understanding what is a DPS player, or maybe more of what role do you actually have? Because it's true that dealing damage is still in the name, dealing damage is a huge part of your role, but it's not everything. I think a lot of people have the assumption that doing really big damage or doing a lot of damage is the impressive part of the DPS player. And while it feels good, it's kind of what it's expected of you. It's expected of you to do a lot of damage in the right times, on the right pulls and the right bosses. But you actually have so much more to offer to the group that of course differs from class and to class and stuff like that, but you have so much things and utility that you need to get in the habit of using. The Hunter for me is a really, really great example of this, because I always get really, really frustrated because I used to main a Hunter. The thing about Hunter is that, yeah, you can actually do pretty fair damage and pretty okay damage, but you also just have so much utility that I don't really see a lot of Hunters, to be honest, are using. My favorite example is just something straight up as Binding Shot, which if you don't know, it's the Hunter fires an arrow in a little area, and it will tether to every mob, and if they walk just a little bit out away from that arrow, they will all get stunned. Or rooted actually, but just having that utility is so amazing for your tank, and you don't actually need to be on communication. You can't, that's one of those things, you can't just throw it whenever you feel like your tank might want to kite, or just throw it down when you feel like it, because it gives your tank a leeway to move and kite away from it. And it actually just creates so much more survivability for your whole run and your whole party. And that's gonna make the run much smoother and go very much faster, and it will make everyone be safer, and do also just improve that, doing more damage, because the pulls will get more controlled in a way. And it's not just a Hunter, every single class has some way to interact with your party, and actually doing a lot of help for the whole group. In that, there's also the whole CC control. It's your job as well to make sure that dangerous things are getting kicked and interrupted, or you are stunning different mobs, and you're just helping through that, through your utility. And of course you're gonna have classes who just have more utility, or you just have more things to offer than others, but it's really important to sit down and actually learn everything. The thing that's gonna differ between a good DPS player and a great DPS player is simply just their knowledge of their class and what utility they have, and actually also just the usage of it, that they throw it down. Maybe it's going to waste, maybe the tank doesn't need the Binding Shot, or he doesn't need the AoE stun right there and then, but it's better to use it than just to sit on it for the whole dungeon. So yeah, there you have it. That's my 3 really fundamental ways to think about DPS players, or DPSing. Use your cooldowns properly, use them a lot, but also try to figure out where the right time are for the usage of them. Get your rotation down so you don't get thrown off as soon as you have to do a mechanic. use your defensive. Your survivability is your responsibility. It's not just a healer's thing or whatever. It's your job to do it as well. And then also, what differs between a good DPS player and a great DPS player, in my opinion, is the usage of utility and knowing how you can benefit the group in other ways than just doing more damage. So I really hope you enjoyed this video, guys, and let me know if you have any questions or anything, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.